Welcome. This is Glenn, and you're listening to Earth Conversations. Earth Conversations is about engaging thoughtful individuals in meaningful conversations that connect their interests and insights to the vision of a thriving, beautiful planet. Today's guest is Jenny Rechel. Jenny is a wildlife biologist with almost 40 years of experience with a variety of state and federal agencies, which are entrusted with the management of our public lands. Welcome, Jenny.
Thanks.
Can you tell us a little about yourself, background, your education?
My name is Jennifer Rechel, and I'm born and raised in Colorado. Lived here most of my life, then traveled around. I was in the military, and I've always been interested in environmental issues since I was 5 years old. And my dad took us fly fishing up in northern Colorado and outside Fort Collins, and hiking, backpacking. And so I was fortunate enough to get degrees in environmental related fields and actually work and get paid to do what I love. I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife, a master's degree in forestry from Colorado State University, and I have a PhD in geography from the University of California at Riverside. And for geography, I did GIS mapping for 40 years. It's a computerized mapping type of work. And I worked in land management, outdoor field work for 43 years, and 34 of those I worked for the U.S. Forest Service in California. My primary focus, I have a PhD, so my primary research focus was effects of fire on bird populations and habitats in the National Forest in Southern California, which there are quite a few, even though people don't know that, but there are. And that was really fortunate. And I also had a secondary long-term, I did the bird study for 26 years, and I had about a 10-year study on fire effects, meaning impacts of fire on different types of vegetation, not specifically related to birds, but different types of vegetation, trees versus shrubs. And I used remote sensing technology to analyze the impacts of fire. But then I retired before I could do any more. So I retired in May 2024.
Okay.
And I moved back here.
All right. Would you address the current Fix Our Forests Act?
Yes, I'm against this. Now I've read multiple. It's called FOFAs. About people say it online. Fix Our Forests Act, but it does nothing, in my opinion, to actually fix the forest. I have a different view of fixing the forest than the people who wrote it, which I believe are the lobbies like the timber industry and pro-logging. And also some scientists actually believe in the Fix Our Forest Act, which the basis of that act is to manage the forests. I call it log, but they said manage the forests, meaning cutting down the trees and bushes, mostly trees, the large trees, to prevent or minimize wildfires. Well, I don't think that that's what's going on out in the woods, because I've been doing field work on the ground, what I call kick the dirt forestry wildlife work for 43 years. And I don't agree with the Fix Our Forests Act, because what I call logging, the act calls management. I'd have to look at their term. It's just a nuanced term. The loggers, the timber industry people will go in. The Forest Service won't do that. The timber industry will go in and they'll log or remove or thin, as the scientists call it, the bigger trees, because they only make money. They have to maximize their profits, and the logging industry only makes money on the big trees for different, whatever they use for paneling or what different reasons, depend on the species. Or furniture, or I don't think they build houses with some of it with housing, some of it be for housing. Smaller trees are left and the bushes are left. But when you remove the larger trees you are removing the canopy of the forest. And that's where much of the life of the forest lives, the insects. And if there's a lot of insects, there's a lot of birds, not just passerine songbirds, but owls and hawks and eagles rely on the canopy. And then you also, when you remove the canopy, it dries out the forest floor because there's no more shade. And actually that promotes more wildfires because it dries out the forest floor. And I don't, that's not, I've read part of that act and I don't see that in there. I've read the op-eds in the local paper. That's just a repeat of what the act says. And it's just really general, of course, but specifics, it lacks specificity. In my opinion, also, I'm against the Fix Our Forest Act because it's a giveaway to the logging industry, like we give away to the livestock raising industry. The Forest Service, funded by the taxpayers, will go in and put additional roads in or fix up existing roads. And then when the logging is done, completed, the roads are still there. And so what are they used for? OHVs. And it's just more disturbance on the roads. And a number of logging projects are done near riparian or stream areas. And they're not supposed to do that, but even if you log 100 meters, 30 feet, 33 feet, 50 feet from a stream or a river, there's erosion. You have dirt and such in the creeks, and that decreases the water quality for fishing. So if you like fishing, you don't always want timber, a clear cut, or even thinning projects. So I don't see those addressed in the Fix Our Forest Act, and I haven't read about those specifics. The people that are for it don't talk about that because they don't go outdoors. They don't talk about those aspects because they don't go out in the woods. They haven't actually been out there to look at it. I've seen it for 43 years with my own eyes. So the roads, the issues with dirt roads. They'll put in dirt. The taxpayers will pay a private company or the Forest Service to put in roads or improve existing roads for logging, which they euphemistically call thinning or management or field treatment. And then there'll be OHVers in there. And if they don't want the OHVers, then the Forest Service has to go in there and decommission the road by making it dirty again or putting blocks in it, putting posts in it or logs or rocks or such. So it just creates an ongoing rolling effect. But now, since the Trump administration has gotten rid of a lot of Forest Service employees, who's going to go do that? We're just going to have too many OHVs out there on these roads where they shouldn't be on. I'm for multiple use. I am for multiple use of most of the national forests. But if you have roads everywhere, you're not going to have endangered species. People are going to be there. They're going to excessively use them for hunting. You're not supposed to shoot from your car and such like that, your vehicles. And then the taxpayers end up paying for damage to the landscape and the stream being polluted with runoff and erosion and this and that noise. And I think that degrades the quality of the national forests, and which is why people go out to the national forest. They belong to the public, not to the timber industry or the mining industry or the dam building industry. They belong to us, you people that are listening. These are your national forests. That's why I'm for multiple use of the national forests outside of wilderness areas. Those are special category. That's enough about the Fix Our Forests.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, just a more general question. Do you think we should end grazing on public lands?
I do. I've never been for it. I think we should end all livestock grazing on public lands, including sheep, so not just cattle. Mm-hmm. How long has that been going on in the western states? Since the 1830s, when the Spanish brought cows up from Mexico to California for food and such all along the missions in California. The hundreds of cattle. So what, how long is it? Maybe before 1830, I'd have to go look, but what, over 200 years? And then it's just become dominant thinking. Well, it's okay to have cows everywhere. It's not okay to have cattle or sheep everywhere. Not in the desert, not in creeks. It's not okay. I think we should end all livestock grazing on public lands, and we should start within wilderness areas. That was grandfathered in, I don't remember the year, probably since when was in the 60s, when was the Wilderness Act created? 1964? That was grandfathered in because cows are king. Mm-hmm. And if you have private lands, you can sure graze your cows. That's your prerogative. You can, get water from public creeks, which you're allowed to do for your cattle, and grow alfalfa. But if that's your land, you can sure for certain graze cows all you want, move them around. There's some grazing strategies, but they shouldn't be grazing livestock on any public lands. Starting with wilderness, they should not be in there at all. They destroy the aspect of wilderness. And they pollute the creek, and then there's cow pies everywhere, which harbor insects that birds like, but that's not the point. And then we have to have cattle guards and this and that, and I don't agree with livestock. There's other issues. The native tribes, they graze a lot on their land and some public lands, but I don't think we should have grazing on public lands outside of the lands that the tribal people own, because this was all used to be theirs. But outside of that, we shouldn't have them. Also, that's subsidized by the taxpayer, meaning that the cattle go in there and they destroy the creek bed by walking in it and defecating in it and such, and it decreases the water quality for fish. So if you like fishing, then your water quality won't be as high. And also that ends up degrading the overall habitat around the streams, called riparian areas. So if you like bird watching and photography, that's going to be negatively impacted by having cows there. Horses I'm okay with. Horses, they're not technically livestock, but horses are managed for backpacks and these packing companies. You have to have certain weed-free feed, and there's only certain trails they can. So I'm in favor. I'm not against having horses on public lands for recreation and the pack industry, or hunters having horses go into certain areas. I am for multiple use on the national forests and the BLM lands, the Bureau of Land Management lands, because they belong to the public, and the public should be allowed to use. I think they get overused and misused, but the public should be allowed to go have OHVs on certain roads and go pack trips and go take your horses hunting to hunting spots. And you should be able to have people have these little mines, some of these private mines in their families, not mining operations. They should be allowed to have those things. It's their land, and they should be able to go camping and hiking and just sit around the campfire. Okay. But I'm against livestock grazing on all public lands.
Okay.
Starting with the wilderness areas. It should not be there allowed at all.
So some of these questions that I'm going to ask you, you've already answered them to some degree.
Okay.
So, but it doesn't hurt, I don't think, to go
Ask them again.
Okay, so question number 2. I know Congress has the power to end cattle and sheep leases on public lands, and they also have the power to designate these lands as wilderness. What do you think of such a goal?
I don't think all public lands should be designated as wilderness, because wilderness is a category on its own and it's more restrictive, as it should be. But if all public lands are wilderness, a lot of people wouldn't be able to use them. And like inner city people, they can't drive there, get there, it's expensive, they can't go backpacking. Or people with with restrictive movements. I think you should be able to go, if you're in a wheelchair or you have a cane, you should be able to go to a campground and use that. But I do think that Congress should not allow leasing on wilderness areas to start with, and gradually on all public lands.
Okay.
They do have the power to do that because it's a law. I didn't look it up before I came here, but they have the power to do that. They can. There's other groups working with land management agencies, primarily Federal Forest Service and the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, to buy up the leases, or if the owners of the cattle aren't making any money, it's not profitable, then give up the leases. Or if they've been in the family forever, quote, grandfathered in, as we say, they should just give it back over to the public, the citizens of the United States.
Okay. So E.O. Wilson, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner.
Who just died recently, really.
Yes, exactly.
A professor at Harvard.
Right.
Studied ants.
He started off as the Ant-Man,
Mhm.
then went into more larger
Right.
ecological issues. Considered one of the greatest scientists of the end of the 20th and
Yes.
into the 21st century. He said, and I'll give you a quote, and I just want to get your response to this. He said, quote, "The only proven way to sustain biodiversity is wilderness."
Yes. I agree with that. I agree with that statement, because outside of wilderness areas, we quote, I'm putting air quotes around this word, manage the land.
Mm-hmm.
The Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service does forest management. It's in the name. There's laws that guide them. The National Forest Management Act. There's another one, it's called FLPMA, the Public Lands Management Act. To me, manage is to manage. It's an active word. I don't know if it's a verb, but it's active.
Mm-hmm.
So people get hired to go out on the land and do things. Do things. Let's try this. Let's manage. And it's put these management activities, that's what they're called, management activities, are listed in our performance reviews. What we're going to do for the year. We're going to manage the riparian areas. And then you have to be specific. Not all management's bad, but I do agree with that. As I mentioned, that the only way to really protect to sustain or conserve biodiversity is in wilderness areas, and even those in some places, the wilderness areas are overused. But at the same time, I think that National Forest lands and Bureau of Land Management lands should be available to the public.
Mm-hmm.
It's their lands. There should be, I'm using that bad word again, management,
Mm-hmm.
but there should be some positive management
Sure.
about, I don't want to say necessarily restrictions, but more monitoring so that we don't have roads everywhere. But we still can allow fishing and allow hunters to go into their favorite hunting spot. And birders and photographers.
Right.
But I do agree with E.O. Wilson. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's not particularly realistic, but I don't think we should give up on something like that just because it doesn't seem realistic. I've mentioned these things to you, the topic to you before, Glenn,
Mm-hmm. Yes,
because it
you
seems
have.
we're not going to do this. This won't ever happen. Well, we don't know that.
Right.
We have to keep the door open
Mm-hmm.
to protecting more lands, putting more lands in wilderness, because we don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Just for the sake of anyone who doesn't know, by biodiversity, we're talking about the sum total of all living species on Earth. So the next question would be, what do you think would happen to a wildlife biologist working in a field office for BLM or the Forest Service or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or even CPW, who voiced their professional opinion that cattle grazing on public lands is a major cause of the biodiversity crisis?
They'd be laughed at because that happened to me. In 2016, I was working on a fire assignment. I also spent 10 years on wildfires, working on wildfires in the West, not as a firefighter, but support staff. And that happened to me. I was on the Inyo National Forest, which is in eastern California, and we were working on a relatively small wildfire south of Mammoth, which is a big ski area tourist town. I'm laughing thinking about this. And we got friendly with one of the Forest Service district biologists, and we got on this topic of grazing and cattle. And I talked to her about we shouldn't have livestock grazing on public lands. And she did not like this. Mm-hmm. She had recently got a bachelor's degree in range science, I think from, I'll just guess, University of Nevada, Reno. I believe that's where it was. And she did not like that. Now, I've been around range scientists before because they're big in Colorado State University and Utah State University. That's an actual degree. You can get a PhD in range science. And there's various opinions from PhDs about grazing, about how it harms, but we need it for this and that. That's too much for this interview. They'd be laughed at. This woman laughed at me. And I had a conversation with her, but no, she would not budge off. No, we have to have cows and this and that. So they'd be laughed at, but it doesn't mean that I would not continue to speak up. Most employees, in my opinion, of these two agencies, and somewhat Fish and Wildlife Service, maybe, I don't know how many of them refuges have actual cattle grazing. And the Colorado Parks and Wildlife have grazing on their wildlife areas. No. You can't have a wildlife area with grazing. You're not going to have any wildlife. Mm-hmm. So they're so degraded. And how much profit do they really bring in? I'm off the topic. Mm-hmm. How much profit do they really bring in? Grazing cows on these relatively small areas of CPW land. Why? It's just, no, and they, I don't think it's not reasonable to have cows in wildlife areas. They don't mesh. But I think public employees, federal employees, they'd be laughed at. But also they're brought up, they're gone through school. When you go through school, that's a science, that's a discipline, range science. Mm-hmm. So you have to manage the range management, forest management. And it's part of the culture. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get around. It's hard to get around it. I don't think they'd be ostracized, but mm-hmm. I was laughed at. So.
Okay, but in terms of fear of losing your job, or being demoted, or being transferred, so they are free.
They might be if they actually tried to do something. Mm-hmm. They might lose their jobs because I did know an upper manager that worked for the Bureau of Land Management in California, in the eastern part of California. I won't say his name, but it had to do with BLM lands and grazing and some issues related to grazing. Well, you shouldn't have cows in the desert anyway. And he followed the law, and the owners of the, I'm pretty sure it was grazing, they went to the local congressman, and this man, he was moved because of that. Because then he was following the law. I knew, and he told me this himself. So there are cases when that happens.
Okay. Now, the biodiversity crisis is also known as the sixth extinction because it is a period of exceptionally high extinction rates, and we have to go back 60 million years to find anything that resembles what is happening today to all the life forms on this planet.
Including butterflies, caterpillars, ants, bees.
Exactly. And Amy Goodman reported just, I think, 2 weeks ago that 1/3 of all birds worldwide are in rapid decline.
Right, and that's been known for quite a while by different conservation agencies. That's been reported not just by the World Wildlife Fund. And it was when a big story came out about that. I think it was during the pandemic, and the media actually covered it as one of their primary stories, which was shocking that they actually covered that, because people love birds and butterflies. Well, most people. When they see a butterfly, oh, that's really nice. And all the birds, even though they're in your backyard, that's the best place, a good place for birds. They just, you like birds, but then the extraction industries go out and get rid of their habitat, meaning get rid of the trees and the canopy. Anyway, go ahead, the sixth extinction.
Okay. Yeah, well, so from your work experience over decades,
43
as you
years.
made clear at the beginning, do you think that most of the people working in the agencies entrusted with managing our public lands understand the severity of the crisis?
Most of them do, but it's just part of their overall job. So it's just one aspect of their job, meaning to understand what's going on. The employees I worked with, which was a number of them, of course, really, they cared about the land. They cared what happens out there. I don't want to say accused, but it was by a friend, a colleague. And he said, Jenny, you really care, but he did too. So, but a lot of employees care. They actually go out there and go the extra mile. They know it's happening, but it's only one piece of their job, because they have to follow these other regulations. These acts that I mentioned before, the National Forest Management Act, another act called FLIPMA, we don't know, the National Environmental Policy Act. These are well-known federal laws, actually. They're not just all policy. And they do care. They see trees cut down, but there's multiple uses out there. For example, there was a really large tree that had died on one of my bird survey sites. This is on the San Bernardino National Forest. And the wildlife biologist had gone out there and she put a post on it, wildlife tree, because the dead trees are called snags, and they're really good habitat, because woodpeckers go in there and they make holes, and they live in the holes. And then when they abandon that hole's available for other birds, smaller birds, like chickadees and bluebirds and such. It's called secondary nesting, because a bluebird cannot go into a tree with a bill and dig out a hole for a nest. No. Woodpeckers can, though. And also there's a lot of dead bugs in dead trees. So they're valuable for wildlife habitat. Then the forest wanted to do some thinning of the area for, quote, wildfire mitigation, which did need to be done. And they just, even though that tree had a sticker on it, wildlife tree, they just went in there. They asked first, and I said no. But they went in there and they cut it down anyway, and the logs, that was in 2004, so the logs from the tree are still in the site laying around on the ground. So they're still beneficial, because dead bugs live in those dead logs, and birds come and eat them and such.
Okay.
So that happens. They have multiple conflicting issues. Mm-hmm. Do we want to close off this creek for 2 months because we're protecting the frogs? And then the public yells, why can't I go there? Well, it's only for 1 mile for 2 months out of the year. We have the entire rest of the forest. So there's the conflicting interests, which is brought about by multiple use. Mm-hmm. But that's the law. That's the law. That belongs to the citizens. They're allowed to use the lands, but I do agree that there needs to be restrictions, and just explain to them, you just can't go here for 2 months. Not the end of the world.
So you mentioned this management mentality is deeply entrenched in these agencies. So I think that's a very valuable
it's part
insight.
of their job.
Do you think that most of these agency people think that they can manage the biodiversity crisis without preserving and restoring more wilderness?
Mostly, yes. There's wilderness areas out there. With the Bureau of Land Management, we generally don't think of them as wilderness, but there are wilderness areas in BLM lands. Most of the wilderness areas are Forest Service lands. They believe you can manage your way out of the crisis. You can manage your way out of the fix our forest act. You can manage your way out of the climate. Sometimes you just have to leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's why another reason, going backwards, why I'm against the Fix Our Forest Act, FOFA. If you just leave it alone, you'll have a lot more. You'll be able to protect biodiversity, if you will, because you'll have the forest will have grasses, shrubs, small trees, medium-sized trees, and big trees with the canopy. And that's where when you have more different layers of vegetation, then you have, that's diversity, vegetation diversity. You'll have birds, insects, birds, snakes that focus on, they just live on the soil, the grasses, the shrubs, the big shrubs, the small trees, the middle trees, and there's many birds that live their whole life just in the canopy of forests or large shrub areas. Most people, management, that's their job, is to manage. Mm-hmm. That verb, to manage. I hear that word and I think, oh no. Yes, that they can manage their way out of every crisis. And the industry, the timber industry, if you read grants and papers and stuff, we're going to manage this and we're going to manage that. Well, there's getting fewer and fewer things to manage.
So switching from the agencies to environmental organizations, I'm sure you're familiar with, right now there is a campaign to advocate for biodiversity to become the primary consideration in the management of public lands. But few of these environmental groups, as far as I can see, are also calling for an end to grazing on public lands. So my question is, do you think it is meaningful to prioritize conservation and habitat preservation without also calling for an end to grazing on these public lands?
Do I think it's useful? What was the word, Glenn?
To prioritize.
Oh, yes.
They want to prioritize biodiversity, but they're not also calling for an end
which you
to
can't
grazing.
do.
So how can you have
You can't have both.
That's my
You're not
question.
gonna, you can't, if you want to prioritize biodiversity, you've got to get rid of livestock management on public lands. Yes,
Okay.
Bureau of Land Management, that includes you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the primary goals of the Bureau, the issues of the Bureau of Land Management is for grazing, livestock grazing. No, they don't fit together.
But also, many of the major environmental groups are calling for that.
They've got this livestock grazing mentality. I understand that. They come through school. That's where they go through school. They learn that. They have bachelor's, master's, PhDs in range management.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I understand that. How many of them have actually gone out and kicked the dirt and see the destructive nature of it? Mm-hmm. Even when I was 10 years old, our father would take us fishing in Swatch Park, Swatch Creek, on the Gunnison National Forest in central Colorado. And many of the stream beds had this eroded banks, meaning they were steep instead of shallow like a normal creek or river bed. And that's from livestock grazing. They walk on the surface, and then the erosion, the surface at the edge of the creek, and finally you have no water left, no habitat left for the fish. And it's so destructive. And then the plants are all trampled down. All the native plants are all trampled down. How's that helping biodiversity?
So why are these major environmental groups?
Because I believe because they have the mindset that range science.
Okay.
Because they're managing it. Because it's just baked in for over 200 years almost. It's baked into the society. Right. And then you see all these westerns on the TV. This is beside the point. Well, there's a cattle. And the TV show Yellowstone. Okay, I have a gripe with that series. But it's just TV, and people should take it seriously. But it's the cowboy mentality, the myth of the cowboy, the myth of livestock raising. So and that series is different because they have private lands, and so they're allowed to do what they want on private lands.
So obviously John Muir had no problem advocating for wilderness.
Right.
So do you think that the political climate in which he lived was more friendly to his goal of creating more wilderness than the political climate today?
I don't think so. I think the politicians in the extractive industries, meaning mining, logging, building of dams. There was another one in my head. They've always been against anything. They've always been against it. I think when the Wilderness Act was fairly new, their words were, "We're going to lock it up." Well, so yeah, we are. We are going to lock up the land. There's only, 3% wilderness in the U.S.? And that's just not enough. And there's various, there's primitive areas and wilderness conservation areas, and that helps. That certainly helps. But they're still allowed, you're allowed to have grazing there. No, they're not compatible. If you want to have biodiversity, which we need to live like bees, pollinate our food, crops, if you want to have birds, then you need to protect the biodiversity. You need to protect their habitat, which is their home. You wouldn't go in and cut off your kitchen of your house. Oh, why don't we have any food anymore? Well, you cut your kitchen off your house. That's why you don't have any birds anymore, food anymore. So no, they're not compatible.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's talk about wolves. It seems to me that ranchers are being adequately, even generously, financially compensated for their losses. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. They shouldn't be getting paid anything. That's my personal opinion. I don't think they should be getting paid anything. If they don't want to lose their livestock, then get your livestock off public lands. Now, if you have your cattle on private lands or a neighbor's land that you leased let's say you have, a few hundred acres. I know somebody has 300 acres in southern Colorado, and they have cows on it, but there's no wolves there so far. And let's say they wanted another 100 acres of their neighbor's land, then that's private land, and it's not fenced. There's a general fencing. But if a wolf came onto your private land, then I'm not against some kind of compensation for that because it's on private lands. Although I'm against killing any of the predators. So I'm not totally against those things because I do believe in having private lands and being able to have some say over what you do. But no, if you don't want your livestock killed, then don't put them on public lands. That's the risk you take. Why is the taxpayer paying them to have cattle out there? Then it just escalates, and you get this rolling escalation. Now we have to how can we keep the wolves away? By the lighting features and all these other things that people come up with. Well, just get your livestock off public lands, and you can use those same mitigation efforts on the border of your private property, because that's your property. You're allowed to do those things. They shouldn't get a penny from us.
Okay.
Ever.
Thank you for your honesty. I don't think many ranchers want to share the land with predators.
No.
There are exceptions, but leases on public lands are privileges.
Yes.
But many ranchers are acting like they own these lands.
The Bundys.
So I just
They
wanted
don't
to get
own
your
the land.
comment on that.
They don't own the land, they're leasing it, or if they're not leasing it, they have these grazing permits, they're called. Animal unit months, AUMs. I think I looked a few months ago, it's $1.35 per acre per animal. It's a kind of I believe a bit of a convoluted formula. So there is a formula out there, but when the cows ruin the environment, who pays? The taxpayers pay. If there's an endangered species, who pays for habitat restoration? The taxpayers. Which, there's jobs in that, and Fish and Wildlife Service is primary, deals with that. And the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is under Department of Commerce, which is just a fact. But the taxpayers pay for those things.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about mountain lions. Proposition 127 to ban the trophy hunting of mountain lions failed at the ballot box. Why do you think it failed?
There's different reasons, and I've read the professionals' reasons. Maybe you have to back and forth on some of them. Were saying, there was one major reason was the quote. I don't know if the term was propaganda was used, that the pro-hunting people, I don't know if that's the correct word, put out on the airwaves. So that would have been one. That happens with all these initiatives.
What do you think?
I think it's because the society right now is it's just mean. Why do we have to protect it? Why can't we just go kill this and let's just go kill them? I think it's just a mental meanness that we have in our society right now because of the people in not just Washington, but I don't want to say in charge. They're not leading anything. It's just mental meanness, because in the 90s there was a lot more positive views of protecting animals. We shouldn't be killing predators. There's not that many of them out there. It's just inhumane.
Well,
now again, if you have a mountain lion that goes on your private property, you have those kinds of rights. But no, you shouldn't be killing them or trapping them at all. Just leave them alone.
I've asked that question to many people, and I have to say that you have just given a very honest and thought-provoking response, and I thank you for that.
I've been doing this a long time. I've been out in the woods for 43 years.
Do you think that biophilia, which is an innate love for nature, exists in most people?
No, I don't. I think a lot of people, sure, but no. They like to see it. They like looking at the environment and a pretty aspen on their calendars, but they'll go out and log it. We want to have all these beautiful creeks and waterfalls, but no, let's go put a dam there. Let's put a uranium mine in the Dolores River Canyon. Well, then you don't have pictures of the Dolores River Canyon in your office, because you're not, no. No.
Okay. What is your view as a scientist of settling issues such as the hunting of apex predators at the ballot box?
I think it's a good way to go about it. If we can't, the management agencies are managing. There's that word again. There's good management, bad management, depending on your opinion. The citizens have a right. I don't call it a privilege. They have a right to have a say in their public lands, whether it's state or federal. And if the people in the agencies work for the citizens are allowed to have input. And I understand that the agencies, they have their way of doing things. Now in California in the 90s, it's another personal experience when this ballot issue was going through where we're protecting the more protection for mountain lions. One of my colleagues worked in the state of California. It was called Fish and Game back then. Now it's State Fish and Wildlife, which is confusing. And he would say to me, he wasn't against the propositions and the citizens having input, but he would say, well, they don't, I can't remember his words, but like not interfering, but we know how to do things, and it just makes things more complicated. And he wasn't against it, but he just, we know how to do things kind of way, but he wasn't against them having a proposition. And I agree with this particular, he's retired now. No, I think we should do that, even though they're not all, quote, scientists. They're the grocery clerk or whatever, the person that bags at the oil change guy, no. We should have a say in it. And then, that means the livestock people, too, they have a say in it, but we should still put initiative out there.
Interesting. You basically have answered this question.
Go ahead.
Ask it again.
Okay.
So would you support a ballot measure to ban all hunting of predators and carnivores?
I'm actually against hunting now. I didn't used to be, but over time, after being in the working outdoors, being in wildlife, a member of the Wildlife Society, and reading papers and seeing things and this and that, we're losing our animals. There's been, during the pandemic, I read a couple scientific papers about the number of wild animals is decreasing in addition to birds. There's hardly any of them left. And I don't think we should be hunting. There's certain cases where you would have to go if you have a wolf or mountain lion on private lands. You go and you have to go hunt them, or mountain lion, which I don't think they should chase them down just because you killed one cow or something. But that's allowed. No, I don't think we should. And then there's the trapping people. Should we hunt or trap animals that are interfering with an endangered species? For instance, the spotted owl is a very passive bird, and the barred owl has moved into the western Pacific Northwest ever since the 80s, I believe. So there's a move to go shoot the barred owls, hunt them or whatever. That's a complicated issue. I think we should have spotted owls, but what do? I'm not in favor of killing all the barred owls. But then another instance, all those pythons in Florida, those are an invasive species and they're killing the wildlife. Go out and get them all.
Okay.
So it's not just one. Nature's complicated. It doesn't just rule by some cookbook or some chemistry experiment.
So many people, myself included, object to all sport hunting on ethical grounds for one reason. How can and should state and federal agencies that oversee public lands deal with this moral issue?
Well, that's difficult because they bring in money. And there's also groups out there, the Boone and Crockett Club, I think they're hunting, but the Safari Club International especially. They take groups out. This is an international issue. I call it a problem, but it's an international issue. Why are we killing leopards? We don't need to kill leopards and put your picture on the internet. Why? Unfortunately, it's part of the culture in many areas, this sport hunting. I don't want to get into people that have issues with animals, and especially places like Africa because it's indigenous. That's out of the topic of this interview. But it's just part of our culture, and we have guns, and people want to go out and shoot things. And I'm not against target shooting, or that's the recreation. If you have a little area, I just don't think we just don't have enough animals. You go outside, you go out on a camping trip. Oh, I saw a coyote. That's a really big deal. Oh, I saw a bear. It's a really big deal. And I do that I do that too. I saw a bobcat this morning on my bird walk. Oh, I saw a golden eagle. Oh, we saw 3 coyotes this morning. And I think, why is that so special? Why is this so special? Because I saw 1 bobcat and 3 coyotes. No. We should be seeing a lot more of these animals, but because there's so few of them, it's a special thing to see a bobcat and a mountain lion and 3 coyotes.
That's a great point, Jenny. Following up on what you just said, some conservation programs are funded by fishing and hunting licenses. Is this a good idea?
I wouldn't want to use the word good. It's beneficial in some ways because they provide income to the state agencies. The states manage the wildlife, the actual animals and their habitat. These are state agencies. The federal government has an overall bigger picture because they have to manage across state lines, whereas state wildlife agencies are just within the boundary of their state. Although recently, I don't know how recently, the wolf, I think it was 2 wolves from Colorado Wolf Project were killed in Wyoming because they went up to Wyoming. And that's a state issue because they'd killed a wolf in Wyoming. The wolves had killed livestock in Colorado, and then they went up to Wyoming, and the Wyoming Fish and Game, or with their agency, and killed the wolves. I don't agree with that. If you didn't have your livestock out there, the wolves out here in this state, then they wouldn't have been killed when they went across, heaven forbid, the border between Colorado and Wyoming.
Okay. This is a little longer question, so I hope I can make it clear. Colorado has roughly 25 plus million acres of public land. About 16 million acres of it is open to grazing. Now, I did some research, but it's difficult to get a percentage of Colorado's contribution to the U.S. beef supply that is coming off, grazing off of public lands. But from all the public lands across the entire West, only 2% of the U.S. beef supply comes off of grazing on
That's
these
another
public
reason we
lands.
shouldn't have livestock, cows and sheep grazing on public lands. It contributes, that percentage is so small. Why are we even bothering? Look how much damage they do. They do a lot more damage than just the 2% does. What percentage of damage to the landscape? 20, 30, 50?
Well, you
No.
just basically stated what I was just going
The
to
opposite
say.
is, they have to have, people have heard this argument that you put all these livestock in these feeding, CAFOs, concentrated the feeding operations. And that's, there's problems with that too. But that shouldn't be on the public, that problem shouldn't be on the public lands. It belongs to us. It belongs to you listeners. We have to deal with it with these CAFOs in another way.
Agreed. And going back to something you said earlier, it costs the taxpayers $123 million for the federal government to administer these leases on public lands, and they're only giving back in terms of the food supply for Colorado way less than 2%.
Yes, so why are we doing that?
Well,
And the employees should be looking out for diversity and protection of your watershed. Because the national forest, and the forested areas on BLM lands, especially in the Pacific Northwest and Idaho, that's where your water comes from. So that's what the employees should be doing. They should be focusing on that. And then now we have fewer employees, so why was that? Why are employees being taken away? Because they don't want the cops on the beat. They don't want anybody watching over them. This is another personal experience. There was an area where this was around 2007, I think, and there was areas that one of the forest districts that I was working with, they wanted to thin some of the trees because it was a drought, which I believe in leaving drought trees there, but they don't because it's considered a fire hazard. So cutting some of them down. And they were doing this area, which I was very familiar with. And I knew they were going to do it, but the forest biologist, she couldn't go out there. It wasn't really her job, but she didn't go out there and monitor them. They hired a private company. And it wasn't really her job. And she didn't have time and such. And by the time I found out I should have gone up there, they had pretty much cleared the whole area. It wasn't a clear cut, but they'd cleared it all. And if I had been out there, they did it to the specifications on paper, but if I would have been out there, I would have pointed, no, leave that one, leave this one, cut that one, and you're still within the guidelines of the thinning of the trees. It wasn't a clear cut.
Is there something that you feel especially passionate about concerning the well-being of wildlife in Colorado and elsewhere?
I think we have to protect the habitat. Stop managing it. Leave it. Sometimes management's good. Just leave it alone. Now, if people have homes around there, I'm not against, quote, thinning the forests around towns and villages. But you have to protect them. But at the same time, you have to, quote, not fireproof. You have to, that's a kind of a ridiculous word because you can't prove anything. You have to make your home and your land around your home, especially out in the woods, you're safer from wildfire. So you have to do both of these things. But I'm a big proponent of public lands, and my issue is protection of habitat for wildlife.
Okay.
Even if it's outside of wilderness areas, even if it's in your backyard.
Okay.
Quit using pesticides. If you have kids around, why are you using pesticides? Use their safe pests, quote, I put that in air quotes, pesticides. You don't have to kill every bug out there. If you want birds in your backyard, you don't have to pesticide every rose blossom.
Do you think that huge houses being built in the Redlands, just as an example, say something about our relationship to the natural world, and what might that be?
I hadn't really thought about that kind of issue. There's also some really big mansions outside Fruta. Just drive along out to the old US 6. There's some big, really large homes out there. That's just a product of capitalism, in my opinion. And why do you need a big house like that? Do you have a really big family? Why can't you could live in a smaller home and live on an acre? But if you bought the land and it's private land and you own it, if you want to put a big house on it, put a big house on it. But I don't. That's
Okay.
just kind of,
All right, so in the time remaining, let's go into politics a bit.
okay.
So how do you identify politically?
I'm a progressive and liberal,
Okay.
and I'm registered as a Democrat, but I'm not a big proponent of being in that Democratic Party. I haven't ever been really, but I'm registered as a Democrat. I'm really liberal and progressive about all kinds of issues.
I have heard people say in Grand Junction that, quote, capitalism is going to kill us all. Would you agree with that?
It's doing a good job of it so far. I'm more of a socialist,
Yeah.
but I'm not for the government owning everything.
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm not for that. I think they're more of a mix, but capitalism should not be the dominant type of economic system we have. It's just for profit. Profit. Look, what can we do for profit? How many trees can we cut down for profit?
Right.
We don't need uranium mining in the Dolores Canyon. That's for profit. Why, Representative Hurd? We don't need that.
As we get towards the end here, there are many problems in the world: inequality, poverty, injustice, racism, sexism, war, and so on. Where would you place the biodiversity crisis in this terrible mix?
Well, my opinion should be right at the top, because the humans live on the land. Everything we get comes from the land, from the soil, from the water. If we don't have water, what are we going to live on? If we don't have soil to grow our crops, what are we going to live on? I'm not for all these hedge funds that go and buy up all this agricultural land, because a lot of that land has been in these families' heritage for 100 years, maybe longer, and they should be allowed to keep it and work it. Why do they have to sell off to these builders? I know they offer more money, but I think everything we get comes from the land. Our pollinators come from the land. Bats eat insects. They eat a tremendous amount of insects. They've been stigmatized, unfortunately, but no, it should be right there at the top.
I said that was the last question, but I do have to ask
Okay.
you this one more question. I believe it was Black Elk, the Lakota Indian chief,
Lakota.
who said, when the animals are gone, a great loneliness will descend on humankind.
Yes.
Do you feel this loneliness already?
Yes, because I stole my work for 43 years. It's so sad. The loss of the birds. I'm excited when I see 3 coyotes. Why? I should be seeing, why see 1 bobcat in 5 years? No. Why? We see a bald eagle in Fruta? No, it's sad. I've seen it with my own eyes. I did the research for 26 years.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, thank you very much. You've been listening to Earth Conversations on KWSI 100.3 radio in Grand Junction, Colorado. Earth Conversations may be streamed at any time at kwsiradio.org. Views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the views of KWSI or the nonprofit that operates KWSI. For an opportunity to share your ideas on Earth Conversations, email us at earthconversations@kwsiradio.org. I'm Glenn. Thanks for listening.